Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're not already, consider subscribing, supporting us on Patreon. It helps us a ton in bringing you more content. So today is going to be an opinion piece on cities that have changed the way I think about transit. Now, I have to start by mentioning, if you're new here, sometimes I do these opinion videos. Not all of them feature a ton of B-roll because if I want to talk about some cities I haven't visited, well, often I don't have B-roll for those cities. So today, enjoy some clips of the Vancouver SkyTrain while I'm talking, but yeah, feel free to put me in another tab or something like that and just listen. Anyways though, guys, let's get into the cities that have affected the way I think about transit. The first city I want to talk about is, of course, Toronto. I lived in Toronto for 4 years while I was attending the University of Toronto for my computer science degree, which I will soon graduate from online. Kind of fitting, I guess, that I'm talking to you guys online and that's how I'm going to graduate. But anyways, it feels a bit weird and disappointing, but fortunately I learned a lot when I was in Toronto, especially about transit and about Toronto's transit system. If I were to say some of the things that I think it changed my opinion on, things like pedestrian tunnel networks. The path in Toronto is incredible and it makes actually accessing a lot of the subway stations in downtown Toronto really convenient, and it almost makes it so that some stations you could do without because you'd be able to access them via the path anyways. Another thing that Toronto really influences my opinion on is streetcars and trams, I guess you would call them if you're in Europe or some other places. Streetcars are something that for a long time my vision of them, at least in Toronto, was of something that was really old-fashioned, and because all the stops are, you have to walk into the middle of the road to get to them. But then seeing, some of the new areas like Queens Quay, Spadina, St. Clair, it kind of gave me the perspective, oh wow, we can be more like a city like Amsterdam or Berlin and have like a good tram network in North America, and that's actually a very viable thing. And seeing how Toronto operates its streetcar network 24 hours a day was really cool because it's the only 24-hour rail network in Canada. And so that was just something super interesting to see. The next thing I'd say Toronto taught me was how important fare integration and kind of even just a cohesive transit network is. Toronto has a number of quite frequent bus and rail lines which aren't on the main TTC map because they're not in Toronto. Well, some of them are in Toronto is the thing. And the issue is that the way Toronto as a region works is that every municipality has like kind of their agency, and then there's GO, which serves the whole region. The problem you see is, though, that every map doesn't necessarily feature the other operators, and it's really confusing, and it means that you might be trying to go from one place to another, and there might be a better service that you could take to get there, but because you can't see them on the map, you wouldn't know about them. Toronto's taught me how you can change your regional rail network. In North America, we have a serious lack of regional rail, and Toronto is one of the few places that has, in the past few decades, built up a diesel-powered regional rail network, which it's transforming into an electrified one. And while other cities like Montreal are doing very interesting things, it is still kind of awesome to see Toronto doing a full-scale electrified mainline network that's going to cover pretty much the entire region. That's pretty awesome. The next city I want to talk about is Sydney, Australia. So I've only been to Sydney once, and I didn't get to spend that much time actually riding around the transit in Sydney, but a few things definitely stuck out to me, and while in retrospect they're probably less important now, I do think it was really incredible seeing double-decker trains in a subway. This is something that actually still, it doesn't exist in that many places around the world. Paris would be another with the RER, but I guess what it taught me was that there wasn't like a technical limit that prevented that. And I think that helps you see systems in a more fluid way. There's not necessarily just one type of mode, because when I had thought in the past, I actually spent some time in Toronto as a younger kid as well, and I remember seeing the GO trains, which were double-decker, and I thought, oh, those could never be in a tunnel, they're way too big or whatever. And so I guess just seeing that in Sydney, seeing the double-decker trains, which looked really cool because of, the really interesting design. I still think Sydney has some of the coolest looking trains around. Seeing them in the tunnel, I guess it kind of just changed my mind about how transit wasn't so well defined, and different modes could be kind of mixed, and you could operate a tram or a double-decker train in the tunnel, or you could do any random combination of different traditional modes, and that wasn't something that the laws of physics basically banned. Anyways, I guess also because when I was in Sydney, I went to a concert. If you're curious, maybe I can answer that, what concert it was in a Q&A or something. But I went to a concert, it was late at night, and it was just really cool going from the Olympic Stadium and hopping on the train in like a giant station, and just getting home late at night and just kind of understanding the reliability and the convenience of a rail network in a city that my family and I had never visited, and yet we were using it to get us home after the night. I just thought, wow, it's really cool. And in part too, because I grew up not riding a lot of public transit, so it was a pretty big deal whenever I rode it with my family, because I just really didn't much as a kid, especially buses. So the next city I want to talk about is London in the UK. So London is a city that, again, I've only visited once, and that's actually something I'm quite upset about. London has so much transit I haven't experienced. You know, the DLR, the overground, the trams, pretty much anything but the tube, even the buses I haven't experienced in London. So London is definitely a city that I think you can bet there will be London content on my channel. The question is when, and it will not probably be too soon given the current circumstances. Anyways though, London is a city I visited basically through staying at Heathrow for about a week at one point, and it was weird. I don't know exactly why my parents chose to stay at Heathrow, but yeah, that's something we did. We stayed there at an airport hotel, and we basically took the tube, the Piccadilly line, if you're familiar with London, into the kind of city center every day. And we did ride a few different tube lines. I think we got on the Northern and the Jubilee, but there's a lot of cool things I noticed in London. It was the first big city network I ever experienced besides New York, and so I was very used to this kind of oh, every track has express trains and all this, and it was interesting going to London and seeing a slightly different setup. Still though, you did have like, there are portions of the Piccadilly line where the District line runs parallel to it, and so it was just cool seeing a different city and how it approached transit. It was also really cool, the connection at Heathrow, how it's just right under Terminal 5. That was really cool to see, and how gigantic that station was, and also having the options of the Connect and the Express, at least at the time. It was all just really cool, and it was interesting because I wasn't used to such a nice airport as Terminal 5 at Heathrow, but then also just how awesome the transit connections were right under the terminals, and so I think that was super memorable. And then also just in general, seeing the tube, it's such an iconic system, seeing how some of the stations are laid out, seeing how the platforms don't line up perfectly with the trains, that sort of thing, how the whole system is not necessarily perfect, but it still functions and carries millions every day. It was a cool city to visit. I want to visit London again. It has so much awesome transport and transit, and so yeah, you can expect more of that. But London is definitely a city I would list. Next up, I want to say New York. Now, I've had family living in New York in the past, still a lot of people who I'm quite fond of and friends with, and New York's subway system is decrepit as it is. I've visited New York a number of times, and I've rode a large portion of the New York subway system. Though again, kind of like with London, I haven't rode the LIRR, I have rode the PATH, but I haven't gone out in the region much. But New York is incredible. It's really a testament to what can be done because New York's system was built so fast. Seeing the express tracks and the express trains, the giant stations, the fact that much of it's elevated, the 24-hour nature of it, it really can, if you have a certain perspective of how rapid transit's meant to work, I think New York will change all of that. In a lot of ways, it feels like what Toronto's streetcar network is to American streetcar networks is what New York's system is to rapid transit networks, i.e., you've got crazy amount of interlining and branches all over the place, tons of flexibility because of the express and local tracks. Just a really cool system. I could go on for days talking about it. And if you're interested in me talking more about any of these systems, leave a comment down below and maybe I can do kind of more long form content talking about some different cities because I definitely have more to say about a lot of them. I think second last here that I have to mention is Amsterdam. Now Amsterdam, it's not really a crazy impressive transit network. It's not that unusual, especially in Europe. It's not necessarily the biggest by any means. Amsterdam's actually not that big of a city. But another city Amsterdam is where I saw a fantastic rail link. That was awesome. The first time I ever arrived in Amsterdam, I took the train in from Schiphol. It was awesome how you just went right under the kind of arrivals area of the terminal, and right underneath there was a rail tunnel. Got on the train. It was really awesome because once we got off the train, so we basically came down under the train station and got straight onto a tram, which went through the kind of neighborhood we were staying in, which was Overtoom, I believe. Amsterdam's tram network reminds me a lot of Toronto's. I think it's because when I saw it for the first time, I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. I wish Canada had something like this. I hadn't traveled to Toronto much at that point, and so I wasn't really aware of the streetcars in Toronto being such a big thing, but I actually think the networks are quite similar because I think there is some mixed operation, maybe. Actually, I doubt Amsterdam has any mixed operation, but it's a cool network. It's near the water in a lot of places. Kind of reminds me of Toronto. Anyways, a couple things that I found notable about Amsterdam's network. It was really cool to see, for example, in Overtoom, how there was literally one car lane on both sides. There was the tram tracks in the center of the street, fully dedicated to the trams, and then there were giant cycle lanes on both sides of the street, bi-directional. And it was just a really different street. I wasn't used to it, and it was cool seeing it functioned. It was really easy to go and get onto public transit right in the middle of the street. As I was saying, all times of day I could hear from my window the trams going by, which was really cool. I also got to see another cool piece of random infrastructure, which is the underground garbage disposal units. I don't know if you've seen them, but this sounds really nerdy, but they're really cool. Essentially, Amsterdam has them, and other cities do, but I think Amsterdam was the first city I saw with them, and I haven't seen another city with them. I believe some cities in the US have them, but it's essentially like a metal grate, and on top is this tiny little bin-looking thing. And I remember we got to our place we were staying, and the person was like, okay, yeah, when you have garbage, just go take it out to this tiny little box and throw it out, and we were kind of shocked. But then later we saw a truck come up, kind of attach itself to the top of this thing and pull it out, and the entire giant grate comes out of the ground, and it's like a giant dumpster stored underground. And so that was just a cool piece of infrastructure that made me think, maybe we don't think of everything when we're building our cities. But anyways, Amsterdam was super cool. The tram network was awesome. It has some single track sections, a lot of pedestrianized areas, just a great network, and a really cool city to visit. So that is Amsterdam. And then finally for this video, and it's not because I don't have experience with more transit networks, there's definitely more I could talk about, but trying to focus on the ones that come to mind first. Tokyo. Tokyo is another city that's kind of like London. Even though in Tokyo I definitely rode a lot more lines than I did in London, Tokyo also has a lot more lines. I didn't touch, the monorail to Haneda Airport. I didn't go on the Narita Express, which I would have liked to go on. I didn't go on a bunch of different lines within the city, subway and metro lines. And so there was a lot I need to go experience in Japan still, and Tokyo in particular. That being said, things I got to ride the kind of elevated crystal mover metro style train to Daiba, which was awesome. That was a strange but awesome experience, especially seeing the scale of some of the stations. I also rode several lines of the Tokyo Metro. Particularly, we were staying on the Ginza line, and it was just so cool to see the different stations of that line. See how the trains weren't actually that giant. I believe there are 6-car trains with 3 doors per car, so not giant trains. But they had a lot of awesome features. Some stations had platform screen doors, which was cool. The yellow color of the trains was really unique, and I loved that. The inside of the trains were totally unusual to me because seating just along the walls, you had display screens above every set of doors, and they would tell you what the arrangement of the next station you were coming into was and how long it was until the next station. There are advertisements hanging from the ceiling in a lot of trains in Japan. It's just it was a different experience, and it was cool. And I got to go to some really cool areas in Tokyo via the Ginza line as well as a couple other lines, and so that was awesome. And then I also rode the JR Yamanote line a lot, and that's an iconic line. It carries alone more than many cities' entire transit networks. You have like 11 or 10 car, essentially subway-style trains operating every 2 to 4 minutes with pretty much all the same features I just mentioned that the Ginza line had, but this is on an above-ground kind of regional train, but it's a subway kind of. The JR lines are weird for people who haven't been to Asia much, which was me at the time. and it was just a really cool experience. The trains are giant inside, and it's weird to look at the tiny narrow gauge tracks and then this giant train on top. I mean, in perspective, giant. They're the same size widthwise as the Kansas line trains. Anyways, though, the Yamanote line was super cool, and it was interesting because there are places where it's elevated super high above the ground on giant viaducts, and then there's places where it's operating in like an 8 or 6 track section with other trains going by. I remember looking for my hotel down on Tokyo Station, and just 100% of the time there was a train crossing your view, which was just so strange but so awesome. It was like they just never ended. And I do remember coming out of my hotel onto a kind of a main street in Tokyo and looking back towards Tokyo Station and just seeing a couple levels of tracks, and there were just literally a constant flow of trains going back and forth. So it was awesome, and it gave me perspective that, wow, Tokyo, I've heard it's big, but Tokyo is just gigantic. The scale of the city is crazy. So I hope you guys enjoyed some of my perspectives on some of the cities I enjoyed transit in, as well as the cities that changed my perspective on transit. I know I didn't necessarily go into great detail on every city, but they were just, some of these cities were so awesome, and I need to visit them again when this whole situation is over. It's always been the plan for this channel to expand internationally, and it was before it was limited because it was in university. Now it's because of this situation, but I do assure you that when it's possible, there will be content eventually on other cities. I want to travel to all these awesome places and share the transit networks with you guys. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in me making more videos like this on other cities, etc., let me know in the comments down below. And as always, have a nice night.